Hello and welcome everybody to our workshop this week. We are going to be talking about service-based interviewing with Cathy Palma, Catherine Palma. I call her Cathy. And I just want to welcome and say hi to everybody who is here for us live. Glad that you've been able to make it. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions. And those of you that are watching our recorded version, we're happy to have you with us here as well. The topic, as mentioned, is service-based interviewing. We're going to learn a little bit more about what that means in a moment, but just so that we know that we're all in the right place. First of all, please say hi. If you don't mind, we've got a little bit of a delay, but if you would, say hi, where you're from, anything like that, that would be great to know that we've got some people here in the room with us. This event is for mid to senior level professionals who are looking for a new position and who want to interview more effectively by understanding the perspectives of the interviewer. And you guys already know us in all likelihood, so I'm not going
to.
Are you muted?
Jason, I can't hear you.
I think we've gotten so many comments of people saying hi, which is wonderful. I think we've overloaded our bandwidth.
Yeah. Good problem to have.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, he's trying to read
you.
There you are.
Am I back?
You're back.
Yeah, we've had that issue with this platform before, so sorry about that. I don't know if we're going to be able to conquer that. It hasn't happened in a while. But if that happens again, please, Jonathan, just pick up the ball and run with it.
No problem.
So I was going to introduce Cathy. She's our special guest today. I'm very happy to have her with us. Cathy runs her own executive search and career coaching business. She started her career in marketing and corporate communications with Wyeth Ayers Pharmaceuticals. And over the past 20 years, she has helped many executives transition in various industries, including high-tech consulting and the nonprofit sector. One of the things that Cathy and I were talking about just before we got on was the service-based interviewing method. And I was curious to hear, Cathy, how did you run across this method in the first place?
Well, I'm kind of a curious person by nature, and I noticed that there were people who just seemed to naturally do well in interviews and people who didn't. And I started trying to formulate what it was that made the difference. And it kind of all clicked one day when I was working on a executive role for one of my nonprofit clients. And I'm like, my nonprofit candidates always interview so well. Why is that? And it occurred to me that the reason is they're mission oriented and they're service oriented, and they buy into the mission of the organizations that they're interviewing for. And they're passionate and they communicate that well in the interviews.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. So we're going to dig into this in a moment. But before we do, I think that there's an important question, which is, what is the purpose of a job interview? I think that is important to set up this conversation overall. And while in some ways that may seem very obvious on its face, I think there's some subtlety as to what's going on in an interview itself. Jonathan, do you want to take that question to start?
Yeah, I try and keep it simple when I help people think through the interview process to help them, not be so stressed out about it. Really, there are two objectives. The client wants to know, gee, can you do the job we're trying to hire you to do? And the candidate, maybe not in the first interview, sometimes not even in the second, but at some point in the process when they like it, they like the job, they need to start asking questions relevant to their career. Who am I working with? What am I going to be doing? What's the career path from here? So the two objectives: fit for purpose for the job, sort of easy in the first couple of interviews, and then start thinking about how is this going to work for your career longer term.
Yeah. And it is definitely from the candidate's point of view. Why should I take this job? How does this advance my career? Is this the right thing for me? From the interviewer's point of view is, how do I solve my problem? What is the business problem that I'm looking to solve? How does hiring this person advance my career, right? The interviewer's career? How does it make me look good in the organization? There are all of these things that are going on in the interviewer's mind apart from the interviewee. And in fact, they're going to be by nature more self-focused. And so we're going to now talk about how to play into that self-focus. And I'm going to bring up a slide here that will kind of guide us through some of the questions that we have about service-based interviewing. So to start with, Cathy, what is a service-based interview?
Well, in a nutshell, it's projecting an attitude of willingness to serve the company, serve the team. Do you buy into their mission? Do you buy into their goals? And then framing your answers in the interview to prioritize the needs of the company or the hiring manager above your own needs, which is not to say your own needs aren't important. They are. But especially in the initial interviews, it's more important to focus on what the company needs.
Yeah. And that's tricky, right? Because one of the things that we want to do as interviewees is present our credentials, right?
Right.
Isn't Jonathan, what do you think about that?
You want to get down to that right away. Make sure that what you can do, what you've done before, is applicable to their immediate need for the job at hand. That'll de-stress the person doing the interview. It forms some advocacy, and it lets you get on to more service-oriented questions around how is my joining going to make you look good? How is my joining going to help the company?
Right.
Yeah. So why is this important?
So a lot of this circles back to what you both were talking about earlier. Consciously or not, the interviewer basically wants to know two things. Will this candidate make my life easier or make me look good? That includes, do they have the basic ability to do the job? Will they bring credibility to my team, within the organization, with our customers? Are they able to take things off my plate and make my life easier? And then that sort of mysterious thing called cultural fit kind of plays into this as well. The other thing they want to know, depending on the role, is will this candidate make or save us money?
Yeah.
And I hate to be, that seems kind of blunt and crass, but that's why companies exist. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, exactly.
How does this play to cultural fit? We didn't talk about that. I don't have anything on a slide, but I'm curious.
That
You
sort of
mentioned
comes,
it.
that sort of comes into will this person make my life easier? If someone's not a fit with the team, they automatically make your life more difficult.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Let me stop for a moment and say hi to people. I see Michael. I see LinkedIn user. Hi, LinkedIn user. I don't know how people get in here in an anonymous way, but it does happen. Hi, Tony, Warren, Jody, David, and Joe. Thanks for joining us today. If you have any questions in the course of the presentation, feel free to throw them up in the comments, and we'll get to them at the end. So, how should I prepare for an interview keeping the service-based approach in mind?
As much as possible, you want to try to determine at least some of the needs of the employer before you get into the interview setting. There's the basic researching the company, go to their website, find out what their mission is if they have a mission statement posted. Look for any clues, any little tidbits of information that might give you insight into challenges the company or the department might be facing. If you have people in your network who work for that company, you want to pick their brains as well as to what some of the challenges are. The other interesting thing that most people don't think of is to look for clues in the actual job posting. Usually the responsibilities that are listed first are going to be the most important, or if there are certain things that are reiterated several times, that's what's going to be most important. And it may indicate that there's a pain point in the organization or in the department around that particular responsibility or that particular issue. We could probably spend a whole 15 minutes on how to actually read through the between the lines on a job posting, so I won't go too much more into that. But there are clues often there if you know to look for them.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
And that being said, even if you do that, you may not know ahead of time what those pain points are.
Yeah.
And in those
So-
cases, you really just have to kind of think on your feet in the interview. And the best thing you can do to prepare is to have as many examples as possible of various scenarios where your work has benefited your employer. The more things you have at your fingertips, the more likely you're going to be able to answer a question that comes up in the interview with an example that will demonstrate your ability to solve that problem.
Well, I think that's particularly interesting because you're not just saying, you're not talking about just a task oriented, this is what I've done, this is what I've accomplished, but this is how I benefited a previous employer. This is what
Exactly.
they got out of it, which goes to something that's a bit of a pet issue of mine, which is quantitative versus qualitative. And I think it's important to quantify your accomplishments and resumes and things like that.
Yes.
But what you're talking about in some ways even goes beyond that, because you're talking about the benefits that somebody's received, and there's something beyond financial benefits that you might be able to point to in your background as well.
Right. And sometimes this will come up in the context of questions around your leadership style, talking about maybe how you benefited someone else's career, how you helped someone on your team advance and develop
Mm.
professionally. Those kind of answers usually play really well with interviewers.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we're kind of bleeding over into how do I interview using a service-based approach. So what I took out of the prepare was, in addition to general due diligence, look at the job's description again and try to read between the lines.
Mhm.
Now, when you're actually in the interview, when the rubber meets the road, what are you doing? You could come from any direction. Any questions, right?
Mhm. Yeah, in general, you'll do better if you use language that shows that you're team or other centered. So simple
Mm-hmm.
things like using we instead of I, or
Mm-hmm.
I led my team on this initiative. So it doesn't become all
Mm-hmm.
about you. It becomes about how you work and play well with others. We touched on this earlier. I'm sorry, Jonathan, did you want to say something?
No, I think you're hitting all the right points. I'm
Okay.
just agreeing.
Okay, great. So, as I said, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but you also want to highlight how your work has benefited previous employers. Be sure you have plenty of examples available. Look for an opening to actually ask the interviewer about the challenges they're facing, either the
Mm-hmm.
company or the department. You may or may not get that opening, but if you do, you want to run with it and ask them about that, and ask the interviewer how they see this role uh, being
Mhm.
pivotal in solving those issues, or
Right.
how you might
Right.
be able to contribute. And then from there, you want to keep those challenges in mind in framing answers as you go through the rest of the interview.
Okay, so you get through the interview. You think it went well. Maybe you didn't think it went well. I don't know, but you got through it, right?
Right.
So, what do you do? How do you follow up?
All right. So, I hope that you all know that you should be writing thank you notes to the people you're interviewing with. If you don't, this is my time to tell you that you should.
Mhm.
And this is your chance to reiterate that you understand what the challenges are. Interviewers want to
Yeah.
know that you understand what they're saying to you. So, in your thank you note, you can say, "I understand you're facing XYZ challenge." And then you can also then either revisit some of the answers that you gave in the interview, or if you're like most people and you come out of the interview going, "Oh man, I should have told them about this or about that,"
Mhm.
because it's hard to come up with those things sometimes. Now is your chance in your thank you note to say, after some reflection, I also thought of the time I did this and this and this, and that
Mhm.
that might be relevant to your needs. Something along those lines.
No doubt, no
Yep.
doubt. And so many people don't write thank you notes, which is kind of
Mhm.
amazing. So, just writing a thank you note in itself is it sends you apart from a
It
lot of
does,
other
and it
interviewers.
shows that you're being considerate of the feelings of the people who are interviewing you. Again, it comes back to being, service oriented. There's an empathy component to this.
Yeah. Okay. So now people might be saying, well, this is really great, but it doesn't sound like all of the interviews I've had.
Mhm.
So is it always appropriate? Like, when is it appropriate? When is it not appropriate?
I think probably 80 to 90% of the time it's appropriate.
Hmm.
Even if the interviewer may not realize what they're looking for, it's going to resonate with them, especially if you come at it from a point of
Mhm.
being genuine, which we'll talk about in a minute. That being said, I think there are probably a few companies where this wouldn't be effective. So if it's a company that has a highly competitive internal culture with a bunch of rugged individualists, which can be pretty common, for example, in sales organizations, this may not play well. And if that's the case, then you have to try to read the room And in those cases, you want to emphasize more of your individual accomplishments and less about your team or your company goals.
Yeah.
But all that being said, this is a very hard thing to fake. you
Yeah.
know, there's a spectrum with all of us. You have, the complete like narcissistic sociopaths on one end of the spectrum, and then you have Mother Teresa on the other end. And most of us are somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
So, but there are things that you can do to kind of cultivate this attitude, because it really is an attitude, and they're going to know if you're just faking it. And one of those things that I like to do is remind myself how good it feels to help other people. Most of us who are good human beings know that. You do something good for someone else and it makes you feel good. And that's how you want your interviewer to feel. Like you're doing something good for them.
Yeah.
So you can cultivate it. It takes a little bit of practice, but it's the kind of thing that you can develop this, not just the ability to communicate it in an interview, but the actual attitude, which in my personal opinion serves you really well in life, not just in the job market.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Great. Thank you, Cathy. We've got a couple of questions. We're going to leave some time for that. But before we do, just to respect people's time, we've gone through our 15 minutes, but we do want to let you know what's coming up before we get to questions. Next week, we got something really interesting. It's a short week because of July 4th. So we decided to do something a little bit different. It's a roundtable. Jonathan, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think what we're going to do is have people come in and talk about issues they're facing in their job search or in their current career, their current company. And we're going to let people see each other the way the three of us are visible. We're going to let people just kind of join in. We'll have a group. We'll deal with some questions. And it's sort of that tactical, here's an issue I face. How would you guys deal with this? And often that can lead to some very interesting discussions. We're going to try and keep it focused, a couple minutes on each question and not so that we get a sort of broad input from our attendees. But I think it will lead to some issues, Jason, that we might want to follow up with in more detail later.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hope a lot comes out of that. And I think it will. So it's going to be a Zoom call next week. So put that in your calendars if you're going to be around, if you're not traveling. And if you are on vacation, it'll be a good time to take a break from your vacation. Okay. So we've also got something coming up, writing your LinkedIn profile and how to use it. We're going to be looking at ageism in hiring. And of course, anything that you want to learn about, please let us know. We're very interested in hearing, what's on your agenda. There was at least one question here in the notes, Michael, on thank you notes. I've been the interviewer in the past and have usually made up my mind about the candidates by the time the interview is over and haven't really felt that a thank you note would make a difference. Has your experience been different? I'm going to take that first just because it just happened. So I had a candidate and who's now getting an offer. Now it's hard to say whether the thank you note made a difference, but I will tell you the thank you note that this guy wrote was impressive. It made an impact on me as a recruiter, and I am pretty sure that it had an impact positively on the hiring manager. So they might have hired him anyway, but I think that it also made a difference in giving the hiring manager confidence in knowing that they were making the right decision. So I think there's really only things that are positive that can come out of it. And there's very little downside. I mean, you might write a bad thank you note, but at minimum, at worst, it's probably going to be neutral. So what do you guys have?
Well, I mean, I think the most important thing about the interviews response is that, you do own it as the interviewer, what's probably going to happen going forward. What I've discovered is from a long-term career perspective, I like to empower the people doing the interviews, the job seekers, to feel ownership for their own careers. And it's frankly fairly empowering for them to say, look, here's how I saw the interview. I thought it went well or not. Here are 3 things that I thought were important. I want the people doing the interviews, going out on interviewing, I want them to feel ownership for the outcome of what they're doing. It's empowering to them to send that thank you note, maybe more important to the person interviewing than even for the interviewer.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Cathy?
I would agree with that. I don't know that the thank you note will ever be the sole determining factor in someone getting the job or not getting the job. Where I find it most effective is if it's a multiple stage interview process. What it might do is get you off the bubble and have you make the cut to get into that next round of interviews.
Yeah.
You can
that
assume
happened.
that thank you note's going to be shown to the next people that might be doing the interviews. So I often say in your thank you note, if you're interested, put down 3 things you took away from that are interesting that you thought about post-interview and comment on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I have seen people get kicked out of the process because they didn't write a thank you note.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's interesting. Good. So a lot of good reasons. Any other questions that we have? Okay. So
I have a question for Cathy. Have you had clients comment back to you when a candidate's come in and taken a service-based approach that, gee, that interview was different? And do you ever hear from the clients on it?
Yes and no. I mean, I have 2 sides of my business. I have the career coaching side, and then I have the executive recruiter side. So on the executive recruiter side, I'll do some coaching with the candidates, but not a lot before they go into an interview. So we don't get into it in depth. I do it more with my job coaching candidates, and I do see there that they get much better results when they go in with this approach. I mean, I've had people who've been in the job market for 6 months start working with me. They get into this, they learn how to interview this way, and they land the next job they interview for. Now, is that coincidence? Maybe. I like to think it's not. Maybe that's my ego. I don't know. But I have seen that. But I have, over the 20 plus years I've been doing this, have heard employers time and time again comment and debrief with me after interviews with candidates. And these are the things that I've gleaned from all of those years about what sets the good candidates apart from the just okay candidates.
Okay. We have another question here. Why don't you take this one, Cathy? How much should you sell yourself in the thank you note versus thanking them and letting them know you are interested and why?
I think there has to be a balance. You want to do both. I think part of it depends on how well you thought you did in the interview. If you didn't think you did very well, then you have to sell yourself a lot more in the thank you note. If you thought it went really well, then you want to reiterate that. You want to thank them. You want to talk, some specific things you enjoyed hearing about the company, and those kind of things.
Okay, good. We don't have any more questions. You want to have the last word on this one, Jonathan?
No, I think, this was very insightful. And I think when interviewing, it's often good for particularly the people, going in to do interviews. Remember, getting the job is one outcome, but another outcome that sometimes lasts longer is the relationship with the people you meet in the interview process. So everything Cathy said will absolutely build your network, build advocacy that probably can serve you well down the road. So I love the service-based approach. I think everybody should take that approach in interviewing.
Excellent. All right. I want to take the time to thank Cathy one more time. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
My pleasure.
And we hope to see you. Sorry about that. I interrupted you.
No, I just said my pleasure.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. And we hope to see you next week at our roundtable and have a very happy Independence Day, July 4th, and a terrific weekend. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.
See you all soon.